According to Forbes, billionaire net worth has nearly doubled in the last 4 years, all while layoffs are at their highest level in over a decade. And with US debt now projected to increase by 55% within the next decade, billionaires, for the first time in American history, are now paying a lower effective tax rate than the average American. Raising the question, when did selling out the working class become the nation's business plan? To set the tone for this discussion, this is a recent exchange between billionaire investor Peter Thiel and the New York Times.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would,
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
in
in
this.
this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
And since this now seems to be such a difficult question to answer, let's reflect on how this exact mindset, one that sees human life as expendable and the endless pursuit of profit and global control, has played out throughout modern history, with one of the clearest examples emerging from the unprecedented wealth disparity of the Gilded Age, where business leaders insisted that the demands of the modern economy could never be met while adhering to the irrational expectations being pushed by newly formed labor unions, reframing calls to end low pay, harsh working conditions, and child labor not as moral imperatives, but as dangerous communistic propaganda threatening economic progress. And no one exemplified that manipulation more than Jay Gould, one of the most powerful railroad executives in American history, who amassed a net worth of over $70 billion today. Where in 1886, after Gould betrayed a labor agreement and fired a worker for organizing, the Knights of Labor, then the largest labor organization in the country with over 700,000 members, launched the first coordinated multi-state strike across Gould's entire Southwestern Railroad empire, demanding not only that the fired worker be reinstated, but also fairer wages, safer conditions, and an end to discriminatory hiring practices. But rather than negotiate, Gould hired thousands of strikebreakers, commonly referred to as scabs, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, a private security force notorious for provoking violent clashes with labor unions, and leveraged his political ties to deploy state militia to forcibly reopen his blockaded stations. And after weeks of violence and economic disruption, Gould and the Knights of Labor finally reached an agreement, and union members were ordered back to work. However, before the ink had even dried, Gould reversed course, firing and blacklisting every union member across the system, causing the Knights of Labor to lose all credibility as their membership plummeted by over 60% in less than 2 years. And while the remaining workforce, now stripped of any protection, returned to longer hours, lower wages, and harsher conditions, Gould was asked how he managed to suppress such a massive uprising. His response? I can hire one half of the working class to kill the other half, establishing a blueprint to divide workers, manipulate the system, weaponize authority, and the illusion of choice to keep the masses turning the gears of an economy built for someone else. Andrew Carnegie, the steel tycoon who amassed a net worth of roughly $310 billion today, despite publicly advocating for labor unions and claiming the wealthy had a moral obligation to serve the greater good, in 1892, Carnegie followed this very same blueprint as he instructed Henry Frick, chairman of Carnegie Steel, to slash wages and discourage union power by whatever means necessary, where Frick constructed Fort Frick, a 12-foot high, 3-mile-long fence lined with barbed wire, water cannons, and sniper-filled watchtowers just to lock out the striking workers, while simultaneously hiring incoming replacement workers and agents from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And while the Pinkertons attempted to breach the strikers' blockade, gunfire erupted, triggering one of the bloodiest labor disputes in American history, where after days of violence, Frick called the Pennsylvania National Guard, deploying 8,000 state militia troops to restore order and reopen the mill under armed protection. And while Carnegie publicly stated, "This is the trial of my life," death's hand accepted, such a foolish step, contrary to my ideals, repugnant to every feeling of my nature. The works are not worth one drop of human blood. He discreetly cabled Frick, "Life is worth living again. First happy morning since July." And with the strike crushed and the union blacklisted from the steel industry entirely, Carnegie slashed wages, imposed grueling 12-hour shifts, and eliminated 500 jobs outright. And while these are just two examples of the countless labor strikes that ended in chaos, Gould's blueprint worked exactly as intended, turning the working class against one another, as the majority of violence came not from the top, but from the workers struggling to agree on what they were even fighting for, where this division was especially clear in the debate over child labor, as children contributed roughly 30% of household income for native-born families, and over 40% for Irish and German households, causing the majority of Americans to actually fight against union efforts for reform, where even amid an endless list of tragedies, like Carmela Tioli, a 13-year-old girl forced to leave school after a recruiter paid her father $4 to forge a birth certificate to exaggerate her age, who spent the next 7 months in a hospital after her hair was caught in a cotton twisting machine, nearly every reform bill was vilified. The chairman of the National Association of Manufacturers even dismissed these efforts as a labor union plot against the advancement and happiness of the American boy, calling it a threat to industrial prosperity. One critic even claimed, "It is a tragic thing to contemplate if the federal government closes the doors of the factories and you send that little child back, empty-handed, that brave little boy that was looking forward to get money for his mother for something to eat." And even as the Gilded Age eventually transformed in the Progressive Era, which laid the groundwork for future labor reforms by establishing workplace safety laws, compensation for injured workers, restrictions on child labor, and early momentum for women's rights. It also marked a shift in how Gould's blueprint would be preserved, where John D. Rockefeller, who at his peak controlled nearly 2% of the nation's total wealth, and whose net worth today is estimated between $400 and $630 billion, established the General Education Board in 1902, laying the foundation for a modern education system to meet the growing demand for a disciplined and compliant workforce, where his advisor and co-founder Frederick Taylor Gates expressed the mission plainly. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and, unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo, great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. For the task we set before ourselves is a very simple as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them for a perfectly ideal life, just where they are. However, this ideological framework remained largely ineffective, as most families were still fundamentally dependent on their children's income, where it wasn't until the Great Depression, with a youth unemployment rate reaching as high as 60% in many urban areas, that kids were finally pushed out of the factories, but into the classroom, as education was now seen as a cheaper alternative to childcare, resulting in a 20% increase in high school graduates by the end of the Great Depression. And while World War II ultimately unified the nation, forcing both government and industry to recognize the importance of the working class, the very people protecting the country while also expanding its industrial base, the post-war economic expansion introduced a new ideology, one that prioritized the long-term value in not just a workforce that could afford the very products they were building, but one with the time and stability to enjoy them. And while this golden age of capitalism is often romanticized by the ability to meet consumer demand off the wages of a factory worker, it